Good morning, everybody, and seeing as we're just after Rosh Chodesh, a good Chodesh, it's really an honor to be part of this program. Big shkayach to the organizers. I believe that Rabbi Mufson had a tremendous role to play in pulling everything together. So a special yashakayach to you, Rabbi Mufson. And in Mitzvah Hashem, just in the schus of us coming together in this very sensitive time, both a sensitive time on the calendar, the 9 days coming up to Tisha B'Av, and sensitive time in our Jewish community's history here in South Africa. The schus of our learning should bring refuah to those who need it, and good health to those who are well, to remain well. And most importantly, we should be able to go straight from this learning to celebrate Yehavchu Hayomim O'elu, the Yomim Tovim, the Moyadim. This should be a good time. It should be the time of the coming of Mashiach now. So Shalom, peace, immediately evokes, in my mind at least, a particular story. You've probably heard the story before, but there's a particular spin on the story that I want to share with you. The story goes that there was a person who becomes a new rabbi of a community, and he doesn't know the minhagim, he doesn't know the customs of the community. And he comes there to the first Shabbos, and what happens? It's time to say Shema. Half the community stands, and half the community remains sitting. And the half that stands says to the other half, no, get up. And the half that's standing, the half that's sitting says to the other, no, sit down. It becomes a whole tumult in the middle of the shul. Eventually they get through the davening. The rabbi is very perturbed by this, never seen anything like it. So when they finish davening, he goes over to some of the chevra who was standing. He says, why are you standing? That's the tradition of our shul, is that you stand for Shema. He goes over to the other and he says, why were you sitting? That's our tradition. We sit for Shema. Those chevra, they came here, they changed the tradition of the shul. Back and forth, he doesn't know what to do. So after Shabbos is over, he goes to the local retirement home where the previous rabbi was. He says to the previous rabbi, I need to understand, what is the minhag in our shul? Do we stand for Shema or do we sit for Shema? So the rabbi says, what happened? What happened during davening? He says, what happened? Half the community stood, half the community sat, everybody was oohing and eyeing and shouting at each other, and there was no consensus. In fact, it seemed like there was a terrible faribel happening in the shul. So the elderly rabbi says to him, that's our tradition. Now we could laugh at it, right? It reminds me of a time there was a person who came here from overseas, and he spoke in a South African shul. This must have been at least 30 years ago. And he wanted to tell a story. So before he told the story, he says, in the story there was a faribel. And then he paused for a second and he said, do people here know what the word faribel means? Yeah, unfortunately, all too well. The spin on that particular story, though, about the Shema, sitting and standing with the Shema, is that Alan Dershowitz once told that story. And he says that when he told the story to his mother about, like this is the tradition of Jews, that we're fighting and that's the tradition. She said to him, yeah, but they were all saying the Shema. And I think that that's really important for us if we're going to explore the topic of Shalom, because there's two ways that we could look at Shalom. There's a way to look at Shalom that is actually very divisive, and there's a way that we could look at Shalom that is actually very unifying, and we have to be sure that we take the right approach. So we're coming up to Tisha B'Av. They tell a story about Reb Pinchas Koritzer, who was a great Hasidic Rebbe. He once came to a particular town at this time of the year. A little bit closer to Tisha B'Av, he arrived, and he heard that there was a major machloikas in the town. And it was raging, it was literally ripping families apart. So it was Tisha B'Av. And he said, I want to address this. I want to give a drosha about the faribel, the machloikas in the town. People said to him, Rebbe, it's Tisha B'Av. You're not supposed to give drushes and shiurim, very limited subjects that you're supposed to learn on Tisha B'Av. So Pinchas Koritzer said to them, what are you talking about? The whole reason we have a Tisha B'Av is because of a lack of shalom, because of sinas chinam. That's why we had a churban in the first place. Can you tell me of another more appropriate topic to discuss at this time of the year? Can you think of a more appropriate topic to discuss than shalom at this time of the year? It's incredibly appropriate. And so again, a yashakayach to the organizers and for choosing this particular theme. But if you look around at the world, something very strange is happening in our world. And I don't know if it bothers you as much, because right now we're caught up in the whole COVID thing, and that's distracted us. But there's really something that, if you pay attention, what's going on in the world, it's it's paradoxical. It's incredibly strange because there are movements in the world today, not Jewish movements, although unfortunately there are very vocal and leading Jewish activists in these movements. There are movements in today's world that claim so strongly that they're movements for peace. And yet somehow all they do is they create what appears to be the opposite of peace. Violence, hatred, and of course what's closest to home for us, anti-Semitism. We have to understand, how does this work? How could you have a movement in the world that argues we want peace, we want to protect the lives of minorities, like in the United States. But the way we're going to protect those lives is we're going to go to the streets and we're going to riot and affect people's lives. We're going to destroy storefronts. We're going to loot people's shops. We're going to burn police vehicles. How can you call this a movement for peace? Or perhaps closer to home for us. In today's world, we're used to, unfortunately, we have 2,000 years of experience with hatred. We have 2,000 years of experience with anti-Semitism. We have 2,000 years of experience of people concocting all kinds of reasons why they should, chas v'shalom, attack us. We have never before in our history seen what we're seeing now. The most outspoken, most vocal anti-Semitic groups in the world hide under the banner of peace, because they care about people in Israel who are being discriminated against or abused by the Israeli government. And so because they want to create a peaceful resolution for those people, they've excused the most horrific and unacceptable treatment of Jewish people around the world. And so you have voices in governments around the world speaking out against the atrocities of the Israeli people. And they have blood on their hands, literally, because people have been attacked in the streets of Western countries. How could shalom, how could something that masquerades as peace produce the exact opposite? Something we have to reflect on, because as Jewish people, we know that whatever goes on in the world is not arbitrary, it's not accidental, it's part of Hashem's divine master plan, and it's there to draw our attention and to make us introspect. What is it about shalom that could become so dangerous? How is it possible to brandish weaponry in the name of peace? We know from the Torah, just to give a context or to give a contrast, we know that in Parashas B'chukoisai we're told that if we follow Torah and mitzvahs, v'cherev loy savor be'artzachem, a sword will not pass through your land. And the Gemara tells us, afilu cherev shel shalom, a sword of peace. What is a sword of peace? Sounds like an absolute contradiction in terms. How can you have a sword of peace? So look, anybody who's a student of recent history in Israel will tell you that the so-called United Nations peacekeeping forces have sometimes been exactly that, the cause of the sword against us. Or whether it was the British who were there to keep the peace back in 1948 between the Jews and the Arabs, and they facilitated the cherev, the sword against us. So we know that a cherev shel shalom is not always shel shalom. But I think what we have to pay attention to is there's a corruption of the concept of peace. There's a corruption of hiding behind the word shalom to actually push a particular agenda. And if you analyze and you look at it a little more deeply, you'll appreciate that what's going on in the world under the banner of peace, under the banner of human rights, under the banner of care for other people, is a horrible corruption of what peace is. Shalom is only relevant when there is conflict. You only need shalom when there are things that don't mix together. Oy se shalom b'meroimov. Straight away the Gemara asks, why do you need shalom b'meroimov? In heaven you need shalom? I would imagine that heaven is a fairly peaceful environment, no? Why do you need peace in heaven? So we know famously because you have Michael Sar Shel Mayim and Gavriel Sar Shel Eish. Michael is the archangel of water and Gavriel the archangel of fire. They cannot collaborate. It's not possible because fire will devour water. Water will extinguish fire. They cannot collaborate. Hashem has to make peace between the two of them in order to facilitate the miracle of hail during the Egyptian exile. Why? because that's shalom when you bring things that are conflicted together. So how do you make shalom between Michael and Gavriel? How do you make shalom between warring parties? How do you make shalom between Democrats and Republicans? How do you make shalom between Jews and Arabs? Not by saying Michael Sar Shel Eish, lives matter. Not by highlighting the distinction between them. That is a distortion of peace. And we have a whole guide in Torah about how you work peace, and that there is a principle of distortion of peace. But if you get it wrong, and you think that distortion of peace means that you could lie for the sake of peace, that's when you have movements that endanger people's lives. That's when you have movements that highlight difference in the name of unity, but actually it's just to push an agenda. So we know very well, right? How do you achieve peace? We know very well. The Gemara tells us in a few different places, the Gemara in Yevamos tells us, Meshanin mipnei hashalom, that you're allowed to distort things for the sake of peace. The Gemara in Bava Metzia talks about how do you know who you could trust at their word? People who never change their word. They're not Meshane except for 3 areas of life to protect either themselves or other people. But probably the one that we know best is the story of Aaron Kohen Gadol. As it says in Avos Derbi Nosan, that Aaron HaKohen was Oihev Shalom V'roidev Shalom, like Hillel says in Pirkei Avos. And Avos Derbi Nosan tells us the famous thing we all know about Aaron, and why everybody mourned when he passed away. Because what did he do? He brought Shalom ben Adam leChaveiroi, ben Ish leIshtoi, between one person and the next, between people who had faribbles, and between man and wife. How did he do it? So we all know how he did it, right? He lied. He distorted the truth for the sake of peace. If we misunderstand that concept, we're on the fine line between corrupting peace and shifting the truth. Meshanin, it doesn't say meshakrin mipnei hashalom. It doesn't say you lie for peace. It says meshanin. Something's got to change. Something's got to shift in order to create shalom. Where previously you see conflict, where previously you see fire and water that can never synthesize, something's got to change in order to facilitate peace. So what did Aaron HaKohen do? So let's say that there were 2 people and they had a faribel for whatever reason it was. It could be because the person sat in their seat at shul, or it could be because it's a husband and wife who have a major misunderstanding, or it was a business deal that went sour, whatever it was. The basic strategy that Aaron HaKohen used, as we well know, is he went to the one party and he said, you know, the other party really wants to make amends. They really feel bad about what happened, and they asked me to approach you to help smooth the process. And then he'd go to the other person and say, I've just spoken to so-and-so, and they really want to make peace, so they asked me to facilitate. Sounds like an outright lie, bald-faced lie. How do you say that? He hadn't spoken to anybody. How does Aaron take that achrayus? How does he take that responsibility on himself to say that he is going to facilitate peace? How? By making up a story that never happened, like Boga v'lo Naga, like Dubin v'lo Yar, it never happened. So how did he do it? And especially, by the way, if you think about it, that when the pasuk tells us that we have a mitzvah in the Torah, ul ledavka boy, that we have to cleave to Hashem, asks the Gemara, are you capable of connecting to the Shechina? So one of the ways the Gemara says in Gemara Soita is that you connect to Hashem. How? You have to emulate the way Hashem behaves. Just like Hashem is gracious, you should be gracious. He is compassionate, you should be compassionate. He visits the sick, you should visit the sick. So a bunch of the Mefarshim ask, it says, emes. The sign, the seal of Hashem is emes, is truth. If we're supposed to emulate Hashem, then surely the main thing we have to emulate is peace, is truth. So how can you be Meshana? How can you change truth in order to be able to facilitate peace? What do we think? That Aaron HaKohen was a nice guy who made up stories in order to bring people together, who fudged the truth because it was so important, because peace is the most important thing, right? Have a look at our modern world and see the devastation, the damage that can occur when you think that peace is the most important thing. Don't forget, of course, that the phrase of our Chachamim is "V'ha'emes v'ha'asholom ahevu," that they love peace and truth. They go hand in hand. It's a partnership. Real peace is with truth. As Pinchas Koretze himself used to say, when I want to bring shalom between people, I add more emes rather than less emes. Meshana, I change my way of just being an honest person to become a brutally honest person in order to be able to bring peace. So what does this mean? How do you bring peace together? The Degel Machne Ephraim, the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, says, why was Aaron HaKohen used as the example of the person who would bring peace? Because in Parshas Ba'aloisra, when it tells us about the instruction that he was given about lighting the menorah, so the pasuk says, "Vaya'as Kain Aharon." Aaron did exactly as he was told. Rashi quotes it from the Medrash. What does it mean? Vaya'as Kain Aharon melamed sheloi shino. Aaron didn't change. Whatever he was told to do, he did it exactly as he was told. Lo shino. He didn't shift. He didn't alter. He didn't change. Says the Degel Machne Ephraim, if you're a person like Aaron HaKohen, sheloi shino, that you never change, that you're always absolutely honest, then you have the rights to be meshane mipnei hashalom, to change something for the sake of peace. Fits nicely with the Gemara in Bava Metzia also, where it says you can only trust a person at their word if we know they don't normally change. But what's really happening over here with Aaron, and what could it teach us? Because it's a really powerful and important insight. Aaron's job was to light the menorah. And as we know from the Haftarah Parshas Ba'aloisra, the menorah is symbolic of the Jewish people as a whole. Just as the menorah had 7 branches, but it was all made out of a single block of gold, so we are as Jewish people. We're diverse, very diverse, 2 Jews, 3 opinions, but we're a single entity. Aaron's job was to illuminate that. Aaron's job was to shine a light on the fact that shalom isn't something we have to work to achieve. Shalom is something we have to discover because it is fundamental. It's intrinsic. As long as you believe that there is a fundamental breakdown that we have to bridge, shalom becomes near impossible, if not impossible. As long as you believe that fire is fire and water is water, you can never create peace between them. But b'meroimov, when you have a higher perspective, when you see things as Hashem sees it, how does Hashem see water? My creation. How does he see fire? My creation. My creations can come together because I define and direct my creations. If you look and see difference, you can never make peace. You're a Democrat, I'm a Republican. You can never make peace. You're this skin color, I'm that skin color. You can never make peace. What's Aaron's job? To shed light on what unifies us, what connects us. That's the path that we find to shalom. That's why it's very interesting that Hillel tells us, Hevei talmidov shel Aaron. Isn't that a thing? Imagine, Hillel tells us, we, ordinary people who may or may not be on WhatsApp, ordinary people, we should be students of Aaron Kohen Gadol, who could go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, who could face Hashem directly. We should be his students. Mi ani umo ani, who am I? What does it mean to be a student, he says? Ohev shalom v'roidev shalom, you love peace and you translate that into action, you pursue actively peace. Ohev asabrios, and you love all people, even those people who have no other accolade bar the fact that they are called brios, Hashem's creations. You don't tolerate them. You don't accept them. You don't say they also deserve. Ohev, you love them. How do you love somebody who is so different to you? How do you love somebody who you feel is so much, so to speak, less qualified or perhaps less important in your estimation? How do you ohev esabrios? How? By pursuing shalom, by pursuing peace. There's 2 kinds of peace. There's the unhealthy kind of peace called compromise. You know what compromise happens? People always tell couples, before marriage, one of the most important things that you have to know in marriage is to compromise. You know what compromise does? It makes each person walk out of there feeling resentful. I compromised, but the only reason I was accepting of the compromise because you also compromised. So we both lose out. Wonderful. Shalom is not compromise. Shalom is harmony. The fire doesn't stop being fire, and the water doesn't stop being water. The hail that falls on the Egyptians is fire and water. We don't compromise. We see how there's something fundamental that links us. Aaron HaKohen doesn't lie for peace. Aaron is mishane. He changes perspective in order for there to be peace. He changes perspective. Instead of looking at our tradition is a tradition of conflict, he says, look, we all say the Shema. Aaron HaKohen, when he goes to the first party and he says the other guy or the other person wants to make up, he's not lying. He's saying, I know that that's what they really want intrinsically, because we are fundamentally one. As the Arizal says, we are koima achas shlema. The whole Jewish people is a single organism, a single body. If one part of the body, chas v'shalom, has an infection and the rest of the body ignores it, the whole body is in danger. We are fundamentally one. We are arevim ze lazeh and meuravim ze bazeh. The Gemara says we're responsible for each other, and the play on words is we are enmeshed, intertwined with each other. Aaron goes to the person and says, I know something about that person that they themselves don't yet realize. They want to be connected with you because that's what their neshama wants. The fact that there's a faribel happening over here is because you're not in touch with your neshama. But were you to be in touch with your neshama, you would know absolutely that you want to be one. Meshane mipnei hashalom doesn't mean you lie for peace. It means you change perspective, your perspective of the other, and perhaps even as important, if not more importantly, their perspective of themselves. I heard a story. There was a rabbi who gave a lecture many years ago in a shul in Miami. And as part of the lecture, he told a story that he was in the yeshiva of the Chafetz Chaim. He was an older man already. And when he was in the yeshiva of the Chafetz Chaim, there was a bocher who broke Shabbos. He smoked on Shabbos. And the Hanhola, the administration of the yeshiva, wanted to, obviously, to immediately expel him. And the Chafetz Chaim said, I want to speak to him first. The rabbi tells a story. He says, to be honest, I don't even know why I'm telling you this story. It just popped into my head right now, and I don't know the end of the story. I just know we saw this bocher go in, we saw him come out. That's all we know. At the end of the talk, everybody files out. There's one elderly man still remains in his seat, and he's pale. So the rabbi goes over to him and says, you okay? You need hatzola, He says, how do you know the story? He says, how do I know the story? I saw it. I was there. He says, I was that bocher, he says. He says, I was that bocher, and when they told me that I had to go to the Chafetz Chaim because I had smoked on Shabbos, I thought, that's it. He's going to lecture me, he's going to reprimand me, he's going to tear me to pieces. I was so afraid, he says. I came into the Chafetz Chaim's house, he says, the first thing that struck me was the abject poverty. I couldn't believe it. A person of his stature that was living in such simplicity, it struck me, it shook me to the core. And I'm waiting, my palpitations, my butterflies in my stomach. So eventually the Chafetz Chaim walked out. He says he was much shorter than me. He says, I was a tall man. Chafetz Chaim is a small man. The Chafetz Chaim walked up to me. He says he took my hands and he closed his eyes. And he stood there for half a minute. That felt like eternity. So when he opened his eyes, there were tears in his eyes. And he looked at me and he just said, Shabbos. And then he said again, Shabbos. And he said a third time, Shabbos. And one tear dropped on my hand. He says, I felt as if that tear was on fire, burning into my hand. And that was the whole conversation. He says, he went out. He says, and I never was Mechalel Shabbos again. Meshanim, change perspective. He didn't lecture him. He didn't point out the difference, the Aveira. What did he point out? Know something about yourself. Know something about Shabbos that is so deep, that is so powerful, that is so beautiful. And when you see it, you obviously want to make shalom with your own neshama. Meshanim mipnei hashalom. How do we make peace? Like Yosef made peace with his brothers. Yehuda is ready to tear the palace to pieces. He says, I'll start with you and end with Paroi. The next thing Yosef says, but I'm your brother. Oh. That's a whole different perspective. Like the story they tell in the First World War, where it was trench warfare and people came literally to hand combat. And there was a German soldier with his bayonet about to kill a French soldier who was lying on his back. And the French soldier, knowing it's his last moments on earth, says, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And the German soldier responds, Baruch Shem Kvod Malchusoi L'Olam Va'ed. We're at war with each other. But now I realize, but you're my brother. That's shalom. Shalom is not that we work to find a way to be able to get along. Shalom is like Aaron HaKohen, who, by the way, the letters of his name spell also the word nir'eh, that which should be seen. We need to find that which should be seen in each other. That's shalom. Meshanim mipnei hashalom. Chas v'shalom, to think we lie for peace. We don't lie for peace. We shift our perspective until we find the inherent peace that lies within us, because we're fundamentally one. Because we have ahavas chinam. We love each other not because it makes sense, but because of who we are. We love our family because of who we are. And that's what reverses the Churban Habayis. And as we say in our davening every single day, Barcheinu Avinu Kulanu Ke'echad. When we stand Ke'echad, when we have Shalom, then Hashem pours His brachas on us. We should have all the brachas that we need: begashmius, health, safety, well-being, peace of mind, healing for those who are unwell at the moment. And the greatest bracha of all, we should have the bracha of Binyan Beis HaMikdash. We should be able to celebrate the Yom Tov instead of the morning of Tisha B'Av in Mitzvah Hashem this year. Thank you for the opportunity.